Phyllis is going to say a few words, and then we're all going to sing When Our Eyes Are Smiling. And then after that, we're going to have some speeches. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Iris.
Yes. Can you hear me? No. Yes.
First, I want to thank everyone for coming. And I'd like to bring up my son and Jack's son, please. This is my son, Brad, and this is Jack's son, Patrick Owen, after his dad. And I want to tell you how Jack and I met. I won't be too long, but we met through mutual friends in Canada. And they used to take me for lunch when Jack came up. And one day I said, I'll have you to my house. So I had him for lunch. 2 or 3 days later, I got a handwritten thank you note telling me how happy he was to meet me, what a cook I am, wanted permission to email and phone me. And then this went on for almost 4 years. And then he invited me down to ski in 2000. And we lived in Old Farm for a year. And then the following January, he got on his knee and asked me to marry him. So that's 22, actually 27 years we're together. Anyway, we're going to sing.
Folks, if you look on the back of your program, your memorial program, you'll see the lyrics to When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. 2 times.
And Jill.
So, hello everybody, thank you for coming on. I'm John's son from California, and there is an Irish connection besides being St. Patrick's Day. But I want to say thank you everybody for coming. I know I haven't met a lot of you in person, but I've heard many of your names, many times. And I know for every person here, there's probably 3 or 4 who not make it, especially from faraway places like Canada, where Dad spent one of the chapters of his life, and where I was born, up in Vancouver. So we are a Canadian family that's now American. So we're all naturalized. So we're legal. But the Irish connection goes back quite a way. So it goes back to the Irish diaspora, really from the 1800s. And my father's ancestors on my father's side ended up going to New Zealand. And my father's father was born in New Zealand and studied in San Francisco, of all places, and became a veterinarian. And in World War I, joined the effort and was part of the cavalry and served in Europe, and also exotic places like the Khyber Pass between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So he was belonged to the cavalry when they actually used horses back there, and was also a large animal vet, and also lived in places like Fresno, California. And if you know California much, Fresno even now is a farming community. So I can't imagine 100 years ago this young Kiwi veterinarian walking around a farming community in the Central Valley of California. Must have been quite a sight. I didn't really, well, I guess I technically probably met my grandfather, but I was a year or less old when he passed away in 1961. He was born in 1988. But after the war, he was making his way back home to New Zealand, And back then, the world was different than it is now, where travel over long distances took a lot of effort. And since it took so much effort and so much time, they're often one-way trips. And a lot of immigrants have that story. But he was making his way from the east coast of Canada to the west coast to catch a ship to head back to New Zealand. And a friend of his, when he was about halfway through the country, said there was a need for a veterinarian to help inoculate some livestock. And so he decided to stop for a while and help out with this effort. And he met a young woman in a town called Dauphin, Manitoba, and never left. And never made it back to New Zealand, which it was really kind of bittersweet when you think about it. And as I wrote in the obituary, we did, and Dad and Phyllis as well went to visit relatives there. And when we first went there was like 1981 as a family, and I think we met one of my grandfather's siblings, and that was kind of the last connection we had with that family. But really kind of an interesting story of this, Kiwi ending up in the Canadian prairies. And so they started the family. My dad was the firstborn, born in 1926, and following him, a brother Jim, and 2 years later, and then 4 years after that, so 6 years younger than my dad, a daughter. And then the last child was 16 years younger than my dad, born in 1942. I never heard anything about it being an accident or anything like that, but unfortunately my dad's younger brother and the sister who was born 6 years later have since passed away, and the only remaining sibling is my Aunt Pat, who lives up in Kamloops, where Bradley lives, and they're horse people like her father, and they'd had horses for many years, and just recently, as they kind of settled down into retired life, got rid of their acreage, and after their last horse had passed away, they decided not to replace them, but are very happy and very active up there. But she's really the last connection we have with that side of the family. And I will say, she told me that she thought of my father really more as an uncle than an older brother. And the reason is, with the war going on, in World War II, Canada entered the war in 1939, a couple years before the United States, along with the other Commonwealth countries. And my dad, father being, having a history of military service, and as a young man seeing Spitfires flying overhead. There was a training base there, and in fact, the cemetery in Dauphin where my grandfather was buried, and this is where my father's ashes will be interred as well. He'll be interred with with his father. So we'll be making a trip over there this year to bring his ashes back home. But I noticed when we visited there were a lot of gravestones in that cemetery of young men, 21, 22 years old, who had died in training accidents learning to fly those fighters, because they were, such powerful airplanes. They were, and I know we have at least one pilot over here, Bill, and these airplanes are so powerful that if you weren't careful, you could just roll them over on takeoff. Had engines develop so much torque, and very dangerous to learn how to fly. And there's unfortunately a lot of young men, really not a whole lot older than my dad was at the time, who were buried there. So my dad at the time, you could join the Canadian Army at 17. Usually the age was 18, but you could join at 17 with your parents' permission. But back then they didn't keep great records. So my dad and his best friend Beak, now Beak is not his real name, that was his nickname. And I think my dad's nickname was something like Ugg, believe it or not. I have no idea where that came from. There's quite a story, but he and his best friend Beak decided to enlist. And so they signed up. My dad was still 16 at the time, but lied about his age, and nobody looked twice, and enlisted and started going into training. And he entered something called the Canadian Army University course, and like his Army uniform would have a little patch indicating which university he was in. He was studying at University of British Columbia, and I guess different universities had different patches. And the course is really to train officers, but at the time he was really still too young to be deployed overseas and too young to be commissioned as an officer. So as I wrote, he was, I think the plan was for him to be deployed to, really to support the invasion of Japan. And as we all know, if you study history, that, it's pretty commonly recognized that would have been a bloodbath. So it's really fortunate for him and fortunate for us that the war ended before that deployment was scheduled. So at that time, since he was still too young to be commissioned and so on, he asked for discharge, and that was granted, and finished school, became a mining engineer at the University of British Columbia. And the only connection I have to the University of British Columbia is they used to send me up to hockey school every summer, like in the 70s. And I will apologize for my hockey smile. My missing tooth is not due to hockey, but due to overeating during the pandemic, and I'm just waiting for an implant to heal, and I'll be able to smile again. But yeah, he had a really interesting education, especially I'm educated as an engineer as well, and the whole the field of mining engineering is really uncommon these days. I guess I know the Greymont people over there, I don't know if you can confirm, it's a Colorado School of Mines, and maybe one of the few places that still offers that as a course, I'm not sure, but back in the day, a mining engineer was a more common field, and he actually went to work in mines, and that's where he met my mother. They were both at a mining camp, basically a place where you live and work. And my dad at the time, and I've commented, we've seen the pictures of sports cars and so on. And this is kind of an avocation that he left behind by the time I came around, because he never really had like hobby cars or anything when I was alive. But before then, he had his little, I guess it was an MG T-type, like a boxy type MG, not the rounded type. And then after that, he ended up in Vancouver, ended up buying an Austin Healey, and he used to, with my mother, he used to like going around these road rallies. And I actually brought his cap over into the room with his ashes, a little cap next to the Urbanist, the cap he wore back in the 1950s, driving his little convertible, Austin Healey around different towns in BC. So that's how they met. He had invited her to go for a ride in the car, and one thing led to another, and they got married, had children, and had a really happy life, and we were living in North Vancouver, which is, for me, growing up in an area like that, visiting again as an adult, I didn't realize how beautiful that area is until kind of seeing it again. And as a small child, and I left that area when I was 6. You have no appreciation because your world doesn't really go past more than 2 doors down. That's kind of your entire world. Everything else is kind of foreign territory. But it was quite a magical upbringing, and a lot of it was due to friends, and that's kind of what is brought a lot of you here, as well as these friendships. So we had a lot of these good friends in Vancouver, and like I said, there's some of the people who wanted to be here now that couldn't make it. And of course, one of the penalties of living a long time is you have to say goodbye to a lot of friends. So there are a lot of friends up in the ceiling and beyond who are looking down, who would certainly be here. So after North Vancouver, he had entered this limestone business, and his old boss Bill was over there, and he basically stayed in that business for his entire career, and was really working for the same company, even though the company changed hands from time to time, and made a lot of friends through that. Some of whom are here, some of whom have passed on already. But he got promoted, moved to Toronto, and we were in Toronto for 3 years, and that was a very interesting experience. And then I think at the time I had the option of either moving to Montreal or moving to Tacoma, Washington. And my mother's parents still lived in the Vancouver area, so that was part of the reason why we decided to move to the States. And in Canada, we refer to the United States as the States, if you've heard that before. So we moved to here in 1970, and he worked in the plant in Tacoma and made a lot of the, friends, some of whom are here, some not. And following that, received another promotion to come to Salt Lake City. And this was probably late 1983 or so, and ended up moving in January of 1984. And I guess there was a horrible temperature inversion going on at the time. And this is like a year after the big flood when State Street was turned into a river, like they sandbagged State Street. So it's hard to believe we're talking about, 39, 40 years ago that, he had been here so long. And I think really enjoyed his time, and I enjoyed catching up with some of the, Greymont and Continental Line people, hearing some more about experiences then, and what work was like for him, because it's a very different type of work than I do, and it's really interesting to hear, and I think he really enjoyed it. And when he came to retirement age, he said, I'm having fun, I don't want to retire, so ended up working a couple more years, and eventually retired when he was 67. So he passed away, and a lot of you, I won't go into a lot of the details after that, because a lot of you, come to know him, especially through the Newcomers organization, which, that and this lady over here were really a godsend to him. Phyllis has this really unique gift, and I really appreciate it, because I don't have it, but she's got this unique gift of making friends wherever she goes. One of my favorite stories is one time she was on an airplane and talking to the people in the seat next to her, and 2 days later they were over for dinner. That's just hard for me to comprehend. When I fly, I rarely talk to anybody next to me. And to not only, have a meaningful conversation with them, but, see them later is really quite a gift. And I really don't like to think what my dad's life would have been like had he not, met you, and you had this, wonderful life together over the last, 25 years or so. And, brought a lot of you into his life as well. And he just, he had a lot of fun. He was retired almost 30 years. So, he retired at 67 and passed away at 96. And was remarkably healthy, really up until the very last few months. And a lot of that was due to how he treated himself when he was in, middle age, when running started becoming, more of a mainstream activity. Way back in the day, somebody who exercised on a regular basis was thought to be a bit eccentric and a gym rat and things like that. And but he really got into it, and part of the reason he did it, so long is he was good at it. He was fast. He was, just kind of the right size for a runner, about 5'9", and won a lot of, ribbons and trophies in its age group on these different runs, mostly 10Ks, but they, that decision to, exercise and really transformed his life, and really jump-started him, well into his later years. I think if he had not done that in his earlier years, he would not have been as healthy. So it's a lesson. I haven't kind of learned the lesson quite yet myself. I'm hoping some of it's hereditary, but I can't count on that. But I think my sister said it best. She said he won. He won at the game of life, and that's I think that's really true. So this get together is really not so much of a memorial as really a celebration, because we all know. We don't get to last year forever, and to make the most of it while we're here, and he really did that. And it's something to recognize and appreciate and remember, and we love you, Dad. So we'll leave it there and go to the...
Could you just mention about the
Oh.
meeting?
Oh, yeah, so we do, so my father's older sister has passed away. Her married name was Spooner, and she had 5 children who still live up in the Kamloops in British Columbia area. And my dad was very close with them and would visit them, fairly often when he was up in Vancouver. And it was a very close family who'd been through their own trials as a family, but their trials just kind of made them grow together even tighter, these 5 kids. And they remained very close, and my dad would always just be beaming whenever he'd come home after visiting them. That just a wonderful experience. So one of my cousins just had a grandson recently, and they're naming him Jack. We're having him like Jack. So the legacy carries on.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was beautiful. Our next speaker is Edwina Rosenbush.
Yes, my name is Edwina, and I have a dear friend, and I would like to tell you about this dear friend. Thank you, Della. See, we all help each other. My dear friend is Jack, and with Jack, you have Phyllis too. They are dear friends, but I'm going to talk about Jack. What a friendship we have had. And yes, I know you have heard that Jack was younger than to be a soldier. He called himself a boy soldier with his parents' permission. And our Patrick, the son of Jack, has told you a wonderful life story. But I would like to tell you that Jack was a Canadian that he was, if you ever heard him sing, "Oh Canada, oh Canada," I have to look, I haven't memorized it. Several years ago, Jack told me the story about being a boy soldier. I have heard Jack sing with pride and emotion, probably with tears, in his beautiful baritone voice, the national anthem of Canada. Oh Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love and all the sun's command. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. And there's more to that lovely anthem. Here in America, my dear friend Jack held his hand over his heart, sang "God Bless America," having become an American citizen. I am grateful for Jack. I am grateful for his friendship. Thank you, Phyllis, for sharing Jack with us, for dancing and dinners you can't ever forget. I am so grateful. Thank you, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Edwina. Next up, we have Bill Dodge.
Two ways. I had to have some notes, and I would normally have done it on paper, but I have to cheat with the cheaters and with the notes. So be impressed with all of these young people that I met Jack for the first time in 1979, I believe, at the lime plant in Tacoma. And I think Phyllis asked me to come and speak to you to tell you a little bit about Jack at work, because I followed him from 1979 until this past month. He's had a fairly long and healthy retirement, as you heard, so it's been quite a while since he was directly associated with any of the lime companies. There are, thank you fellas for inviting us, there are half a dozen of his people worked for him or worked with him here, and thank you for including us. Jack started in the lime business with a company called Domtar. Started with Domtar, I think, in the gypsum business, didn't he? And then ended up in Toronto, and then back in the lime business in Tacoma. And shortly after that, a company called Steel Brothers, through a subsidiary called Continental Lime, purchased the plant in Tacoma. And since then, Jack was part of the same family as I had started out with. He brought me down to the U.S. from Canada. There's a theme here. I just realized. I came in 1984. The company that Jack was managing here in the western U.S., very small. The first Christmas party that I was at, we held it in a booth at the Hilton Hotel. All of the employees and all of our spouses were in the booth. And today it's a huge company, probably hundreds and hundreds of people. And it all started basically with Jack. Is Ted Young here? We have to talk. The six in the booth included your mom and dad. Jack and Jerry, Ted's father, Jerry Young, basically were instrumental in developing from scratch a business in lime. One of my favorite anecdotes of both Jack and Jerry, the Newmont Mines, very small company at that time, were building a gold mine or expanding a gold mine in Nevada, and all of the poobahs in Canada from the lime company were talking to all of the poobahs, Newmont Mines, somewhere, wherever they were. And they weren't getting anywhere, getting the contract for this huge growth that we were hoping to supply. Jerry and Bobby and Jack, with intelligence from the famous Gerald T. Young, he knew that the purchasing agent at this little mine, who actually was going to sign the purchase order, it was his wife's birthday. So they loaded in the car with chocolates and flowers for the receptionist, and went to Elko, and I think took the purchasing agent and his wife to Winnemucca for the weekend, celebrated his birthday, and came back with the order, and that has been the company. It's probably the second largest lime market in the U.S. that grew from scratch, and Jack and Jerry left us in a position to basically control it. So a very talented businessman. I'm not near as talented with these notes here. He wants to. Later on in this period, Graymont bought, the company changed hands and I ended up getting sold. So I was away from Jack's direct work for a couple of years. During that time I worked for a competitor. And an interesting story. One day in Las Vegas in the airport, and those moving sidewalks that go opposite way, I'm with the president of the competitor, and Jack and Jerry are riding the other way on the moving sidewalk. So I sort of stop and take this president guy from Union Carbide from New Jersey, really a powerful guy, I thought he was. Anyway, we return and we go back and we meet Jack and Jerry and shake hands. And then he goes back to his sales guys and says, "You can't beat that pair of old farts." And he didn't. I think one of the things that all of us that got to work with Jack, his integrity, he listened, he trusted, we trusted him, and he trusted us. One day, just to demonstrate this, again, the famous young couple, Bobby and Jerry and Jack, and another fellow, a sales manager, and his wife Eileen, Glenn Morey Jones. They're coming back from Las Vegas, and Jack's car, Jack's driving. They're at 55 miles an hour. And they're coming through Provo, and they get pulled over 10 o'clock at night or so. They get pulled over for speeding. So the trooper comes up to Jack and says, "You were doing 67 miles an hour in the 55 zone." And Jack said, "That's impossible. I had the cruise control set at 65. So Jack demonstrated integrity. The trooper demonstrated the value of dealing with a man with integrity. He said, "Fine, I'll write it at 65 instead of 67. And we're still teasing Jack. We're still teasing Jack about spilling the beans that he really was speeding. But Jack, I think, is still proud of himself and still laughing at all of us for not getting the real message, which was telling it as it was important. And hopefully those of us that worked with him still remember and learn. He certainly was a very, very influential guy on me. And my damn iPad keeps going to sleep on me. Another one. This is definitely about Jack, but Jerry and Bobby Jerry was a neat one. Jack also, through all the time that I knew him, was a teetotaler, and we could always count on him as a designated driver. One night, Jack and Jerry and Cliff Lewis and I are coming back from Bunker Hill to Spokane, and Cliff and Jerry there was a little tavern on the side of the road that you could not go, you couldn't go past this tavern without stopping. So we stopped, and by the time we're out of there, poor Jack, he's the designated driver, of course. We are late for a plane in Spokane, and so Jack is actually, driving at Jerry Young's speed, 20 miles over. We get there late. And I will never forget that night because when we turned the rental car in, there was no time. I'm interrupting myself with my own cell phone. I'm in trouble. That's my wife's, a friend of my wife's. I was supposed to answer that and let her into our building. It's going to ring again. Anyway, I'll never forget that night because we rushed through the Spokane airport. I got on a metro liner going into Seattle without getting to stop at the washroom, and that's a long way. A cute one. Jack and I traveling one day to the plant in Cricket Mountain, Delta, Utah. And Jack always liked to stop for coffee on the way. And he also liked to stop at the washroom. Anyway, we stopped in Levan, Utah at the local watering hole. And there's a half a dozen locals drinking their coffee, sitting at the bar in this tavern. The whole tavern is empty. We finish our coffee, And Jack goes back to use the washroom. It's way in the back, past the pool hall, pool tables and stuff, and he comes back out and he can't find the light switch. Well, there's a young fellow who had been sitting with us who is a little bit mentally challenged, obviously, even had his hat on sideways and talked with a bit of a lisp. This young fellow goes running back to help Jack needing to find the light switch. And the guy thinks that Jack doesn't know how the light switch works. So he marches up to the light switch. And, up is on, down is off. Up is on, down is off. And Jack again, profusely thanks this young man, as if Jack had never heard how the light switch works. And it makes him feel like $1 million. And that's how, and Jack did that for all of us. Anyway, I hope those of you that worked with him learned as much as I did from him. His working career, he was very thoughtful, very smart fellow, wonderful communicator, listener, very insightful. And we miss you, Jack, but the world's a better place from what we learned from you. So thank you for having us, Phyllis.
Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have Raj Sharma.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. My name is Rajiv Sharma, and Jack was a very, very good friend of mine. I've known him for decades and decades, and I'm going to be brief because I get very emotional thinking about all this. I just want to share one story. Excuse me. I was over at dinner at Phyllis's home, and she cooked the most amazing, probably 13-course meal, maybe. And after all that, Jack and I, we retired to the living room. The rest of everybody was in the kitchen still, discussing, talking. And I said to Jack, Jack, how do you do it? How do you do it at this age? I want to be like you when you're 82. There was a long pause, and Jack leaned over to me and said, Raj, I'm 93. And Jack had been lying to me all these years. And we had something in common because I lie about my age too. Like, I don't take a whole decade off. I take a couple years off the top. And what he told me is, and I'll never forget it, he said, Raj, I do this. One, there's two reasons. One, that 93 seems really, really old. And the second is that if you think I'm in my 80s, I feel like that. He never felt old. He told me, Raj, I heard this from a Clint Eastwood movie, I guess. He told me, he said, don't let the old man in. He said, don't you ever let the old man in. And those words still ring true to me today. I'm almost, I don't want to say how old I am. I took a couple years off. I'm almost 60. I'm almost 60 now, and I can't believe I'm even saying that because I've been lying about it my whole life. So that feels pretty good saying that here. Phyllis, I loved your husband. He taught me so much, and I'll never forget that night and all the other times that we met. But that just resonated with me more than anything. and how to go forward in life and how to live our lives, in a relevant way. God bless him. God bless you, Phyllis. My parents knew Jack, and I've probably known Jack for 30 years. I wasn't going to take up a lot of time, but now they asked, probably 20 years ago, I met Jack in India because I was visiting, and Jack was visiting too. And out of all the sea of unfamiliar faces, I walked out of this hotel, and there was Jack standing there. And I said, "Jack, welcome to India." And Jack, the grin from ear to ear, I'll never forget in my life. And we spent the whole day together. We spent the whole night together. And just talking about all the wonderful things. And that was another evening that is so close to my heart. I mean, there's just so many moments that I can't, But my father was Jack's very dear friend, and my mom. And my father and mother are in India right now. They're in their 80s, and they wish they were here tonight to celebrate Jack's life. So I wouldn't miss this for the world. I'm just very happy to be here with you all. And I was telling a few other folks here, at this age, to have this kind of a showing just shows you what the measure of a man like Jack is. I just wish that when this time comes that I could be as loved as Jack was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael?
Thank you, Raj. That was fabulous. And I think everybody here will agree with me. Raj told me how old he was when he first got here, and I'm like, there's no way you are that age. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it too. Next up is Ted Young.
So I'm going to outdo Bill here because not only do I have my own notes, I have some for my brother too. And so, double notes. And my wife Deb's with me here too, as well. So, as Bill told some stories about Jack and my dad and Cliff Lewis and some others. And one of the photos that circulated there is Jack and my dad in their St. Patrick's Day garden. So, that was my dad, Jerry. And Jack became part of my life, I guess, when he moved to Tacoma and moved from Tacoma to Salt Lake. And that's about the same time Deb came into my life. So Deb and I have known Jack for about that whole time. And when Jack came to Salt Lake, he was by himself. And he spent a lot of time with our family. So between 84 and 2000, early 2000, maybe 2001, and Phyllis became part of it, then it was Jack and Phyllis and my mom and dad. But up until that point, Jack spent a lot of time at family events, and the bottom line is he added value to every family social event that he attended. It was great to have him. And I'm sure, and as Bill would attest, he also added value to my dad's business dealings as well. They partnered well, and they brought value to the company, and they found a way to get it done. So that was a lot of nice experiences to see that relationship and witness it firsthand. But to me, Jack validated at times when I had just graduated from university and I'm about ready to leave home, but when I see my parents, their friends, they kind of validate who your parents are and who they are as a family. And so having Jack as part of our family just really validated to me who my family was. And we must really be worth hanging out with if this guy is hanging out with us. So that felt really good. And to me, Jack was a really great combination, and I think we've heard this in every story, but a great combination of class, intelligence, humor, and adventure. And a very well-balanced person from all of those perspectives. And the relationship with my parents and then Jack and Phyllis even went to the extent of the wedding was at my parents' home in 2001. And it was overseen by Reverend Michael Jackson, not the one with the white glove, but another one. And my dad's dog, Major, in attendance with the bow on his head. And then some other events that I remember from the adventure side. So I did get the chance to fish several times with Jack, fly fish, and play golf as well. There was one particular fly fishing trip that my brother Tom, who I have some words to read from, and myself and Jack went on. We went to Kelly Creek up in kind of the Idaho-Montana border. And it was a long drive back into Kelly Creek, and it was a very hot summer. It must have been 1989, 1990. No, a little later than that. It was probably like 2000, yeah, 2000, something like that. Long drive in, dusty road, pitched a tent. Jack followed my brother and myself in. I think, and I'll have to maybe, Patrick and Phyllis, you can check me if I'm wrong, but I may have been the last guy to spend a night in the tent with Jack, because he and I slept in a tent. The next morning, he got up and said, "I'm never sleeping in a tent again." So that may have been the last time he slept in a tent. My brother had slept in the back of his SUV, and then Jack and I were in the tent. But that trip, because it was so hot and dusty and the water was so warm, it only lasted one night. But that was one adventure. I do remember a venture with Jack and Jeff Freeman back on Rock Creek, just east of the Bitterroot Valley in Montana. A couple rounds of golf at the Old Works Golf Course, but a lot of adventures and a lot of great times and a lot of class that Jack brought to all those events. Deb, you want to say a couple words about an experience?
So Phyllis, my kids wanted me, I have amazing kids. I have two fabulous kids who were just blessed to know you and Jack. And my kids wanted me to remind you of the night that we had dinner at your house and they swam in your pool and Coulter's eyes got so irritated from the chlorine. And he wanted me to relay how, and this is so out of character for him, I'll just say. He's a really sensitive kid. He's super critical, I guess, of the people he loves, and he adores you guys. So I used to kind of critique that when he was little. Now I just honor it because I know he has really good taste. But he was commenting that he wanted me to share with you how much it meant to him that he got to spend that night at your house. You snuggled him in on the bed and took care of his eyes that were irritated from the chlorine and fed him great food and how much fun he had with him and Jack. So that mattered. And then the only other thing is, I remember running with Jack in Missoula, Montana. Ted and I have always been fairly active, and so this old man Jack wanted to go for a run. And I thought, okay, fine, Jack, we'll humor you and go. And he kicked our butt. So we were running along, and I kept looking at my watch like, how much longer is he going to go? And it lasted forever. But it was just a great lesson in staying fit. And I remember thinking he was so old, and I believe he was younger than we are now. But that's another story, Phyllis. So thank you very much. Thanks for letting us be here with you.
And then my brother Tom wanted me to read this. So Tom's my older brother. He lives up in the Seattle area, but he spent a lot of time with Jack as well. And he said, my father and Jack worked together in the chemical line business where they became good friends. I enjoyed the stories they would tell about their adventures during business trips together around the Mountain West. My first memories of Jack are his attendance at family dinners during holidays and special occasions when I would come back to Salt Lake to visit. He fit in great with everyone as he was friendly, humble, and kind. He also laughed a lot and enjoyed life. Over the years, we were able to golf together several times and occasionally fly fish. He was easy to get along with, and we always had a good time. Both Jack and Phyllis were loyal friends to my parents. This was especially evident after my dad suffered a stroke and my mom was affected by dementia. Many other friends quit visiting my parents, but Jack and Phyllis continued to stay in touch with them on a regular basis, offering their friendship and support. St. Patrick's Day was always a special day for Jack and my dad. They loved celebrating the holiday and usually ate corned beef and cabbage at least 2 times, if not 3, during the day. There may have been a few drinks and Irish toast involved as well. We will all miss Jack, but we have many good memories and are all better off for having known him. That was from Tom.
Last but not least is Richley Gilmore.
Good evening. I had to write some notes down because I tend to ramble if I don't write them down. I also tend to ramble if I do write them down. I'm honored to be here to talk about Jack McGuirk, who's been a mentor and a friend to me for about 50 years now. I knew Jack through the line business as some of these other gentlemen did. Phyllis, I want to thank you for this honor of sharing some things with you. I give you my support and love as you deal with this period with your loss of your longtime companion. But as a bit of background, I first met Mr. McGuirk in the early 70s. My father, Matt Gilmore, had started a small line recycling company. And I started working for him from day one as summers in high school and college. And one summer early on, probably 73, he decided to go on a trip to Tacoma to talk to this line plant about whether or not there was any kind of business that could be done with him. And I was lucky enough to go with him on that trip. And his appointment was with Jack, and my dad and Jack became very good friends quite quickly. And by 1976, we had agreement with the Domtar Lime Company to handle the lime kiln dust waste product out of that plant. And Jack was the one that signed that agreement to market that byproduct. And I'm mentioning this so I can point out my respect for Jack and why I regarded him so much as a mentor and a friend. Our company handled that dust, that waste product from Tacoma from 76 till when they shut the kiln down at that plant about 10 years ago or so. And in my early years, I ran that operation. I was kind of a truck driver and the manager of it. And in that early time, Jack was incredibly supportive to me with advice, encouragement, operational help, and occasionally some very constructive criticism, given, of course, in that very polite and positive manner that he had. I didn't know it at the time, but his willingness to help me in the early part of my business career had a profound effect on me. I don't think he consciously decided to be a mentor to me, but me knowing that if I had an issue with some aspect of our Tacoma operation or any other part of our small lime business, I could come in and ask him questions, get help if needed, and that was a big deal to me. I think his influence helped me to learn the power of practicing civility when dealing with customers, suppliers, and others. The idea of being respectful and doing the best possible job you can do, owning up to your mistakes, things like that. Whether he knew it or not, he had a lot of influence on this 20-something kid. After he was promoted and moved to Salt Lake with Continental Lime, I continued to work with him on some other projects. And our relationship continued after he retired and existed to today. And I always enjoyed meeting up with him from time to time for lunch or to play golf, which, by the way, in the 80s, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but you had to play golf if you were in the lime business. I wasn't very good at it. And Jack was such a friend that he attended not one but two of my weddings. So I thought that was and his influence on me continues to this day. I do want to share two really quick examples of the advice that he would give me from time to time. And this one was, he once went to his files and gave me a copy of a piece of information on some equipment. And a couple months later, I was looking for it, and I couldn't find it, so I asked him another copy, and he gave it to me. And then 2 weeks later, when I lost that copy, he went to his file, he copied it, brought it back into me, and then he sat me down and he gave me quite a lesson on the value of a very good filing system. He certainly suggested to me that I adopt one. One other advice, and this actually is probably the only advice that at the time I did not really appreciate. And I guess I can say this. Okay, it was the late 70s. I was in and out of the plant because I was probably driving at that time. And I was in the reception office, which in this building was kind of in the front corner. And I was talking to the young lady that worked there in that area of the business. And I was kind of, Jack wasn't there. It was just she and I, we were chatting. And apparently Jack walked down the hallway. It was kind of an angular building, so he walked down and probably back to his office in the other wing. About the time I was very awkwardly trying to ask this young lady out for a date. Now, I don't remember all of the words that were spoken. I do remember one, and I have to put my notes down. You know how I said that I vividly remember this, and it's kind of things that the mind does. I remember looking over when Jack said something, and I remember his stance, which was leaning forward, and I vividly remember his index finger pointing, probably beyond where it should have been able to point, and the word no resounding on this reception area, which at the time I was a little miffed, but in retrospect, that was probably just as good an advice he could give me at the time as any other. So I actually appreciated that. So anyway, to 50 plus years into my career in this wine business, I realized how fortunate that I've been in my personal life and professional life to have met individuals who have been able to, that I've been able to learn from and develop friendships with. And Jack is at the top of that list. To me, he embodied, and this has been mentioned, he embodied the attributes of a gentleman. He was polite, honest, straightforward, true to his word, ethical, and a host of other positive attributes. It probably wasn't apparent to me when we first met him in 73 or 4. But I was going through some of my company files, which, by the way, don't tell Jack, are still not very good. But I found the original agreement that he and my dad made on that waste product to market it. And it was one paragraph written on a piece of paper on one of those legal pads. And one paragraph had the whole agreement in it, and both their signatures on the bottom. That agreement has held up since 76 till 10 years ago. And they did upgrade it. They put it on type paper and typed it up. But even so many years later, it was still only 2 or 3 pages. And my point is that I was able to witness early on. I'll use some better words here if the idea that I witnessed a piece of business that was built upon mutual trust and respect by these two gentlemen, working it out, shaking hands. And that made a huge impression on me, that business didn't have to be really complicated, that if you're dealing with some honest people and you're both in it for the good of the project or whatever. And I don't think Jack ever knew exactly how much of a mentor was. I regret not telling him, actually, but he certainly was to me, and I will never forget him. And Phyllis, thank you again for letting me speak.
Well, wow, what a guy. Oh, absolutely. So, thank you all to all the speakers. That was beautiful. I feel like I know this guy, and I feel like I better start acting a little better in my life after hearing all those beautiful words. Thank you for letting us take care of y'all tonight. Everyone continue to eat and drink and to celebrate Jack's life, please. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is sweet red and that's more, it's a lovely,
We were always going to the and he went on tennis for so many years. And I went back.
We're heading.
Like 30 years ago, I had a Toyota Corolla.
Come on back.
Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. It's a good thing you're throwing salads.